I work at the University of Melbourne in social and political science, and also work for the state government in Victoria, Australia, in the Office for Medicinal Cannabis. And the University of Melbourne research is primarily focused on ayahuasca. So it's a nice segue from that last presentation, actually, about the need to look at different ceremonies, different settings, and different contexts to understand different effects of ayahuasca. Because there's quite a lot of that sort of focus in this presentation and the project that it's talking about. So just an overview, I'll sort of go over the project team, why we would look at ayahuasca use globally, which is the goal of this project, some of the policy challenges about ayahuasca being used in different contexts, an overview of the project and the sort of measures that we're using, and then some early results, a snapshot of some early results. So the project team, we've got people from Australia, Brazil, Czech Republic, Switzerland, Milan and Helena are here, Hannah. So it's quite diverse, and there's people across psychiatry, psychology, anthropology, public health. So it's very multidisciplinary as well. PRISM in Australia, MAPS is also supporting in terms of promotion. So I just want to acknowledge the work of the whole team in the sort of behind this work that I'm presenting today. So why would we think about ayahuasca use globally? And this project, which you might have seen in your packs, the Global Ayahuasca Project is the name. There's a link to the website there as well. And a lot of it comes down to this variation in risks and benefits. And traditional use has been carefully structured in a way that can optimally manage the set and setting to minimize risks and maximize benefits. And with this globalization of ayahuasca, you're seeing it's being used in a range of other settings where there's not this level of traditional generational understanding of how to use it. The ayahuasca churches have also developed quite a high degree of structure and process, which you would think would also be quite effective in managing set and setting to, again, minimize risk and maximize benefits. And once you start getting outside of these settings, as I was saying, like the structure is going to be more variable, the skill and experience of facilitators. So when you're looking at the neo-shamanic ceremonies in Australia and other Western countries, the level of knowledge of ayahuasca, the level of experience that people have had in Peru or Australia is often a lot less than in South America, although there's also a growth of the tourist-focused, more commercial centres in South America as well, which sometimes don't have that level of knowledge. The political risks, there's this risk of prohibition and criminalisation because there's this fear of ayahuasca, and it sort of is outside of a lot of the Western paradigms of healing and spirituality, and endangering Indigenous traditions in taking these practices from their original context and transplanting them into other settings. So looking at the studies that have been done so far, which tend to suggest that ayahuasca is safe, generally safe in particular contexts. They're mostly done in the ayahuasca churches. So there's been quite good research in the churches saying that if you're taking ayahuasca, these columns are benefits, mental health, physical health, psychological well-being, addictions, spiritual and life direction. So there's a range of benefits that have been found in the ayahuasca churches. There's not so much in the neo-shamanic. There's a couple of qualitative studies. This isn't a complete list, but it's sort of a snapshot. We're starting to get a few randomized clinical controlled trials that are showing positive results in terms of mental health. And there's been a couple of studies in traditional contexts as well. But there's not really a lot once you start looking into Western contexts. So the sort of variations that are important are this changes in situational safety, physical, emotional, energetic, providing support across all those areas, support with assimilation and integration, psychospiritual distress. So people after ayahuasca sessions, there's from different studies evidence of like maybe 10 to 25% of people having some sort of difficulty integrating those experiences. plant substitutions and additions. As Mudge was talking about, in Australia there's use of different plants and the use of Syrian rue and other add-in plants to make the DMT orally active. Safety processes, interactions with food and drugs, effects on existing physical and mental health conditions. There's to some degree this idea of ayahuasca as a panacea, that it can cure whatever condition, whereas in traditional contexts, shaman with decades or generations of knowledge have more of an idea of when it would be useful and when it might not be useful or might be dangerous. And then this cultural containers and support, which is quite set in the traditional context, but in Western settings, there's not the same understanding of the effects of ayahuasca and not the same level of support in the cultural sense. So these also lead to political and policy risks. In terms of the legality, there's this risk of ayahuasca being made illegal, or the plants being made illegal, which it has been in a number of countries. In many other countries, it's in this sort of grey area of ambiguous legal status, including Australia. There's this public health concern of using a psychoactive substance for healing, which is outside the sort of biomedical paradigm of health. Also with spirituality, this skepticism about the use of a psychoactive substance to support spiritual experiences. Trying to measure the effects of ayahuasca, like the Western paradigm is much better at looking at mental illness rather than benefits, and there are these benefits that people report in terms of life lessons and life directions, which don't fit so well into the Western psychological paradigm. The healing paradigm of ayahuasca is much more of going into the experiences and trauma and reprocessing them, whereas the Western approach with SSRIs and other medications is more about this mollifying and reducing people's experience of distress. There's this political aversion of governments being afraid and driven also by the media of some sort of negative effect from negative reaction. So if someone has an adverse reaction to ayahuasca, being on the front page of whatever the local sort of paper, tabloid paper is a real political concern. And then there's this lack of data in Western settings. So I'll mention on the next page, the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration recently declined a request by one of the ayahuasca churches to have DMT legalized in natural forms for religious purposes. And there's also to some degree this like actual disinformation from the INCB and TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia, about the level of risk associated with ayahuasca. And these are a couple of quotes which sort of identify this. So the INCB, talking about ayahuasca in this first quote, talking about this exploitation by drug trafficking networks and retailers resulting in an increased trade, use and abuse of these plant materials. And this skepticism about the spiritual aspect of increasing popularity of practices that purportedly have spiritual connotations, such as spiritual tourism, under the cover of which psychoactive substance materials are consumed. There's no references in any of these documents. They're just sort of making this statement, which also reflect the ideological position about the use of psychedelics. Australia as well, when they rejected the application by one of the ayahuasca churches, they noted that there's a potential for abuse has been reported. Again, no references, just this sort of carrying on this narrative. Risks of dependence, again, sort of just like this unsubstantiated claims. Food interactions, which is to some degree true. But it is also notable that the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia, for example, did say there's a lack of data and a lack of evidence to support whether it is actually safe to be used, which to some degree is a valid argument in Western settings. So this project is taking a multidisciplinary approach covering public health, psychiatry, anthropology, and the aims are to inform drug and health policy, contribute to the understanding of the therapeutic potential of ayahuasca, explore the transmission, modification and adoption of traditional practices of both the churches and traditional groups, and for this to be able to support safe and effective practice. The first part of the study is this global survey of ayahuasca drinking, which we're up to, I think about 700 people have completed that so far. The second and third phases, which we're currently applying for funding for, is for a longitudinal study and more qualitative sociological anthropological data collection. So the global survey is non-random, cross-sectional. It's looking at patterns of use, reported effects on health and well-being, and risks of harm in a range of contexts. There's a very wide range of data being collected: demographic, ayahuasca patterns of use, motivations. This SIMO is a short index of mystical orientation, which we're sort of expecting, like with the psilocybin studies at Johns Hopkins, that they're finding that the stronger the spiritual experience, the more beneficial the clinical benefits. Types of other drugs used at the same time, and other plant substitutions or additions. Context of drinking, so where are people drinking, what are the characteristics of those situations, how many people, how many facilitators, what sort of support and safety people are being provided with. Health conditions and medications, so looking at a range of pre-existing mental and physical health conditions, and then reported effects on the condition itself, people's ability to cope, which has been identified in a couple of studies as having a beneficial effect, the need for pharmaceutical drugs, and we've got some condition-specific measures in there. So if someone has depression, we have a range of depression measures that are specific to that. And then the concurrent use of pharmaceutical and plant-based medications, other plant-based medications. Life effects, so we're sort of looking at reported effects from participants on a range of areas: intimate relationships, relationships with family and friends, physical health, emotional well-being, life direction, sense of purpose, and life overall, which are all, from our early data, very much, this is a 0 to 10 scale, around the 7 to 8. Interestingly, intimate relationships, there's a small proportion of people there that report negative effects, more so than in any of those other areas. The psychological well-being post-traumatic changes questionnaire looks at these domains of self-acceptance, autonomy, purpose in life, relationships, sense of mastery, and personal growth, which is a retrospective measure. Lifestyle effects, which is trying to pick up on this anecdotal reports of people having ayahuasca, reducing their alcohol intake, improving their diet, these sort of changes that haven't really been measured previously. Life changes, again, this area with ayahuasca of people changing their career, ending relationships, starting new relationships, trying to get some data around this, ending problematic alcohol abuse, starting problematic alcohol abuse. Personal insights, and there's a range of items there which come from the existing studies of the sorts of benefits and insights into their life that people are reporting, and also spiritual significance. And we're using there the how significant ayahuasca has been in your lifetime, a measure which is further into the slides from the psilocybin studies as well. Adverse events, acute physical mental health effects, emotional mental health difficulties, so this integration problems, which we're actually finding this is reasonably high, of 20 to 25% of people that have at some point reported some sort of emotional or mental health difficulties in the weeks and months after their ayahuasca experiences. I'll speak about that more at the next slide, where I've got some data. How long these lasted for, what sort of supports people used, how effective they were, and whether it was part of a positive process of growth or not. This idea of being energetically attacked or some sort of harmful connection with the spirit world, which is also around 20% of people are reporting that they have experienced this. So sort of significant numbers. Type of integration, supports used, and then we've got a range of mental health measures, the Kessler-10 psychological distress, SF-12 general health survey, we look at lifetime mental health. and also adverse childhood experiences, being an area that people often report benefits. Current alcohol and drug use, and lifetime drug use as well. And then there's some spirituality and religion measures. So there's a lot of data that we're collecting across these, across the survey. And as we then are able to break that up across countries, across regions, and across contexts of use, for example, traditional versus neo-shamanic, it'll start to have some, we're hoping, very interesting reflections. So I'll just go through a few things here of what we've found so far, and maybe looking at just a couple of things about the patterns of use, what sort of benefits people are reporting and what sort of adverse effects. And so in terms of motivations, very much people seem to be using ayahuasca for this spiritual awareness, understanding or connection is the most common motivation, closely followed by these insights into yourself or your life or parts of your life, so both around or just over 70%. Clarity of life purpose direction is also very high, like 63 or 4%. It then drops down to this general interest in psychedelic medicine or therapy, which is interesting actually, at 42%, and then dealing with emotional difficulties, improving relationships. So very much, we do have items in there as well about just to get high or to experience the visual effects, which are very low. People are using it for spiritual healing and personal insights predominantly. In terms of the way it's being used, and then thinking back to the INCB and the TGA talking about this potential for abuse, it's the vast majority of people are using it in these groups which are led or facilitated. And that's either by the churches in a neo-shamanic context where there's a formal leader, or in a traditional context where there's a traditional shaman. So it's over 90%, and so here it's broken down into Western countries, other Latin American countries, and Amazonian countries. And you can see even in the West, it's still, I mean, actually in the West is the highest there in terms of the lead facilitated. So we've got lead facilitated, a group ritual ceremony, that's people using it without a guide, but still as part of a ritual ceremony, so they're friends or acquaintances. Group social recreational, which would fit into that, probably in terms of the INCB definition, into abuse of the drug, is extremely low. Alone as part of the ritual ceremony, people have done that as well. Very low in Western contexts, certainly it's higher in Amazonian countries. And then alone just to take the drug with no ritual ceremony, again, extremely low. So it really presents a strong case that ayahuasca is quite different to other drugs that might be a concern of the INCB. Change in health behaviours, and this is some interesting data picking up on these anecdotal reports of people changing their lifestyle, often not going into the ayahuasca ceremonies with any intention of this. And the orange is a bit or much more so now using these practices. You can see physical health, eating a healthy diet, around 70% of people report this. Doing physical exercise, alcohol consumption is reversed, so around 50% of people report much or a bit less. 8 or 9 increased, and there's small groups of people going the other way for these as well. So this is quite interesting from a public health perspective, that there's huge amounts of money spent on public health campaigns for health promotion, which have marginal, if any, effect, and people are going and having ayahuasca and having these significant changes, which, I mean, need to be actually verified in longitudinal studies, but it's, yeah, an interesting effect. Effects on pre-existing conditions. So here the middle bar is the neutral, the yellow is no change. So the purple and the 2 bluish bars are positive. So you can see across these conditions, there's overwhelmingly people reporting positive effects on the condition. Depression, the purple bar is completely resolved or improved, so that's 27-8% of people felt their depression was completely resolved through their use of ayahuasca. over 40% much improved. PTSD, over 50% much improved. You can see significant improvements, and interestingly in this autoimmune and asthma as well. And we've got a range of other conditions. This is just like a snapshot of what we've got there. And it's sort of with this asthma and autoimmune links into this new ideas of DMT having these anti-inflammatory effects that we could be seeing coming out in these results. Some negatives as well though, so it's worth noting with PTSD, there's just under 10% were much worse after taking ayahuasca. So once we have the data, we can start looking in more detail at where are people getting worse, can we try and like break it down and see, is it particular ceremonies, is it particular plants being used that are leading people to have more negative outcomes. Life changes, healing a long-standing personal rift or conflict was the most common, 37%, changing your career direction, 35%, increasing involvement with environmental and social causes, almost a third, ending problematic alcohol or substance abuse, about a quarter, and around 80% of people felt that ayahuasca had been a significant contributor to one of these. There's more that are listed here, that one of these sort of life changes. Personal insights, new understandings of your own personality, connection to the natural world of plants and animals, sense of sacredness, all 2/3 or above. I won't go through all of these, but again, people are reporting significant benefits. So we go on to ask other questions. If people answer that they have received experienced these sort of insights, what the effect of those was on their life, and we also have qualitative questions which follow, asking for more information. So what degree of your ayahuasca experience has been spiritually significant to you? So about, for most people, or no, for 42 or 3%, it's single most spiritually significant experience of their lives. And 27 or 8% among the 5 most spiritually significant experiences of their lives. So it's very much that people perceive that they're getting very strong positive spiritual benefits from the use of the TGA. Then looking at this by context, we can see the Amazonian countries in red. There is slightly more people saying that it's the single most spiritually significant experience of their lives. Also slightly more in the top 5. Whether that's to do with the ceremony, whether it's to do what factors are influencing that, it's hard to say at the moment. But across both contexts, it's very much strong major benefits in terms of spirituality that people are perceiving. Adverse effects. So this is, as I was mentioning before, adverse effects that people have experienced in the weeks or months after ayahuasca on at least one occasion. So they might have had ayahuasca for many years and only had this on one occasion. We don't have the data on how many times this occurred. But this disconnected or alone is the thing that's sort of standing out, 32%. The top 4 there are the PHQ-4 measures, which is a short anxiety depression measure. So it's significant numbers of sort of 15 to 20 or 23 or 4% for most of these items, which we then go on to ask more questions about. And again, looking at this one in terms of contexts, there's not much difference between the Amazonian and the Western countries. Across all of them, it's really just this, people feel a bit more disconnected or alone in the Western settings, if they've mostly used ayahuasca in Western contexts, but really not much difference. And this is some of the qualitative data that we've collected relating to these effects. So it's interesting, the sort of spontaneous changes. It became totally apparent to me became totally apparent, that's supposed to be to me, that my alcohol consumption was causing harm to myself and my family. I've eliminated alcohol from my diet. Greatly increased my self-confidence, increased the seriousness with which I conduct my life, examine my values and choose my actions. This has added to the sense of who I am. So some really powerful reports from people that sort of support the quantitative data. There's also this other side of the negative. In different ways people have reported. Ayahuasca alone amplified my sexual trauma and freezing for many years. This is now recovering with therapy from a trained curandero and much less regular engagement with the plants. Experienced myself almost dying during a ceremony of being very strongly negatively impacted by the trauma of this. At times I now feel very strongly like nature, God, the divine doesn't want me to be alive. So there's the other side. Even though it's less common, there are the difficulties that people face in the weeks, months afterwards. So that's the project website. If you have had ayahuasca and haven't filled out the survey, we would love you to fill it out. Yeah, so I'll leave it there.